Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about sleeper quarterbacks for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 4 different quarterback prospects who I believe are not only being undervalued in your upcoming drafts, but can definitely have a high upside in the 2020 fantasy football season. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, click the subscribe button down below, join the community. Also, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Notifies you when my latest video has dropped. Outside of that, the only thing I need to remind you guys, Andrew Kiorkof's 2020 Fantasy Football Draft Guide will be coming out August 10th. We're very close. A little bit later this afternoon, I will also be releasing a video that pretty much tells you guys everything about the Patreon, where you can find the draft guide, everything associated with it, that all encompasses that. So I'm excited. Hopefully you guys are. I can't wait to show you guys what I've been working on for quite some time now. So outside of that, that's pretty much it. Let's talk about sleeper quarterbacks going into the 2020 season, starting off with Matthew Stafford of the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford had an incredible 2019 year. Unfortunately, he only played 8 games, but in those 8 games, with the new offensive coordinator change, Darrell Bevell coming in, Matthew Stafford was unstoppable. From weeks 1 through 9, he produced 2,500 yards, 19 passing touchdowns, 5 interceptions only, in 171.56 fantasy points in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. When we compare that and look at what he was able to produce in 2018 was the absolute opposite. He was on a downward trajectory, and the fact that they were able to completely switch it in 1 year's time, just because the offensive coordinator change. Sure, they brought in Hawkinson, they brought in Amendola, they improved the offensive line there. Everything was shifted, and Matthew Stafford went from being a guy that a lot of people ignored in terms of their respective drafts to being the guy that they wanted to pick up on the waiver wire, who was a suitable fit for teams that potentially had Ben Roethlisberger or Drew Brees or Nick Foles in the first couple of weeks, who got injured and out. But either way, a couple of statistics I got to mention about Matthew Stafford, talking about how incredible he was. From weeks 1 through 9, in the 8 games that he played, he averaged 21.45 fantasy points per game. If he had stayed healthy and played the entire season, he would have finished as the number 3 quarterback in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. On top of it, like I mentioned before, he posted career highs in touchdown rate, yards per attempt, air yards per attempt, yards per completion, and QBR last season. All these numbers, incredible. And there was nothing to really slow down Matthew Stafford except for obviously an unfortunate injury. But we did see a little bit of a glimpse of this in the beginning of the 2018 season, where he averaged 18.11 fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 7 of that season. And then eventually they traded away Golden Tate. Marvin Jones was injured. Kerryon Johnson went down, and everything around him subsequently kind of fell apart, and so did he. But now that we're going into the 2020 season, and they've continued to build around Matthew Stafford, I think this is probably one of the most talented teams that has ever surrounded him in terms of offensive line structure, the talent that they have at the running back position and wide receivers. I know we're all used to Calvin Johnson catching the ball from Matthew Stafford. That's what we all kind of remember. But if you don't remember, Matthew Stafford used to always be a QB1. Where did it all go wrong? Matthew Stafford was a guy that was always synonymous with being the number 7, number 8 overall quarterback in a 4-point or 6-point per passing touchdown format every year. But the offense got a little bit downgraded. They really couldn't find anything in terms of production out of Matthew Stafford at times. But I believe with the offensive coordinator change and everything that they've built in Detroit, it's Matthew Stafford's year, and I think he's going to be incredible. Now, a couple more statistics that I want to talk about in terms of, posting career highs. The number one thing that Matthew Stafford has always done has been a gunslinger. And obviously getting back on his horse and being able to produce like he did last season was promising. From weeks 1 through 9, he had the most deep pass attempts of all quarterbacks. Deep pass meaning 20 plus yards. Now last season, the overall player that led the statistic was Jameis Winston with 99 total attempts. In the first 8 games of Matthew Stafford's 2019 season, he threw the ball 57 times for 20-plus yard targets. If he had played an entire season, he absolutely would have been the number 1 player in terms of overall deep throw targets, instead of being the number 16th overall. But to be honest, when I mention this statistic, it's mainly because of the fact that they have Kenny Golladay and they have Marvin Jones in this offense. And when you have the ability to throw the ball to 6'4" wide receivers down the field, you're always going to find success. I mean, of the 57 passing attempts he had, 23 completions. Sure, the completion rate's not great, but everyone's deep pass completion percentage is pretty terrible. But it's the 6 touchdowns that are pretty much the thing that I look towards and think, if you can continue to throw the ball deep, these receivers that dominate are going to catch the ball. I mean, from weeks 1 through 9, Kenny Golladay had the most touchdowns amongst all wide receivers, and Marvin Jones had the 6th most touchdowns amongst all wide receivers. And in half PPR, Kenny Golladay was the number 10 wide receiver in that span of time, and Marvin Jones was the number 15. So imagine if they're going to play a full season, how much better Matthew Stafford could potentially be, and how much better he can make the surrounding offense. Speaking of the surrounding offense, when we're talking about offensive line, sure, they lost a couple pieces this offseason in terms of like the center, their right tackle's gone, but they've gone ahead and addressed that. They brought in the Eagles offensive lineman. They drafted 2 offensive linemen in the 3rd and 4th round. I know they're guards, but they're coming in to pretty much play as a cushion or potentially win the job in training camp. But it's really important to protect Matthew Stafford. Again, every quarterback in the National Football League, when under pressure, is going to struggle. But Matthew Stafford struggled mightily. He only had a 49.47% passing completion percentage when under pressure, in comparison to a clean pocket where he had a 71.4% passing completion percentage. Pretty big difference there. But again, Matthew Stafford is going to play better this season because of everything that's surrounding him. Whether he's getting pressured or not, last season, again, he was pressured heavily and was still a stud from weeks 1 through 9. I mean, the amount of drop-off the Detroit Lions saw with the absence of Matthew Stafford was incredible. I mean, sure, Jeff Driscoll and Blau weren't able to really get anything going, but they were ending up looking like a top 10 NFL offense, averaging 25.5 points per game, to just being a bottom 5 offense, averaging 17.13 total points per game as an offense. That in itself is ridiculous, but that's the difference maker that a guy like Matthew Stafford is, surrounding him with more talent like a DeAndre Swift, with Hawkinson going into his 2nd year. I have the utmost confidence in Matthew Stafford, and I think he's going to be an incredible sleeper quarterback this year. Let's go to move on. Oh, goodness. Let's go to move on here, and let's talk about our next quarterback on today's list. We're talking about Ryan Tannehill, quarterback of the Tennessee Titans. Now, Ryan Tannehill is a very interesting prospect. Last season, took over the job in week 6, once they decided, okay, you know what, we're going to pull Marcus Mariota in the second half of this game. And Ryan Tannehill came in and he produced very well. In fact, as soon as he was given the starting job from weeks 7 through 17, he was undoubtedly, he was the reason why, besides the fact that the Tennessee Titans went to the AFC Championship, but he was undoubtedly, in my opinion, a top 3 quarterback in that span. And the statistics even prove that. I mean, besides the fact that he had the 2,742 passing yards, the 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 185 rushing yards, which is a pretty big difference maker, and 230.18 fantasy points. From weeks 7 through 17, he averaged 22.5 fantasy points, and he was the number 3 overall quarterback in that span of time. I mean, that in itself speaks, volumes. On top of it, in those 10 weeks where he was a starting quarterback, he had 10 consecutive games of 2+ touchdowns, and 5 games of 3+ touchdowns. That is just beautiful. When we're talking about his accuracy, Ryan Tannehill was one of the best last year. Outside of him and Drew Brees, these were the top guys in terms of accuracy in all aspects of, just passing the ball in general, whether it was down the field, deep throws, red zone opportunities, play action opportunities. He dominated. When I look at his adjusted completion percentage, it was at 76.8%. That's basically getting rid of all the bat downs, the drops, the spikes, and the throwaways. Almost a 77% passing completion percentage. That's incredible considering the wide receivers that surrounded him, and the fact that, they're not that incredible. Sure, A.J. Brown was able to produce a pretty good amount once Ryan Tannehill took over the job, but outside of that, Corey Davis? That's Adam Humphries, Jonnu Smith. Those aren't the greatest wide receivers in the National Football League, but Ryan Tannehill was able to produce regardless, and he was able to do that in conjunction with the fact that they were heavily running the ball for a majority of that second half of the season. He only threw the ball on average 27 times a game, which was his career low. When you go back and look at what he was able to do in Miami, he threw the ball about 34 times a game. So 7 passing attempts less per game did not affect Ryan Tannehill at all, as he pretty much averaged his best career season in 2019. Now, Obviously, Derrick Henry's going to help, but then again, Ryan Tannehill also is going to help Derrick Henry. I mean, in the red zone last season, he was the most accurate quarterback with a 70.27% passing completion percentage that led to 14 passing touchdowns. Sure, those touchdowns don't, go into the back pocket of a Derrick Henry, but when you're down in the red zone and you need a quarterback to save the drive and lead it to a potential opportunity on the goal line rather than a field goal, Ryan Tannehill was able to do that, and he was able to help Derrick Henry. So there was pretty much a give and take there. On top of it, in terms of playing against the AFC South, he averaged 22.3 fantasy points per game against them, which is, absolutely fantastic. Keeps me excited about the 2020 season. Now, in terms of the team that surrounds him, one of the best offensive lines in the league. Sure, they lost Jack Conklin, but they went and they spent a first-round pick, 29th overall, Georgia right tackle. He's going to fill in. He's going to be a bruiser. He's going to be a mauler. And he's going to help this offense overall. In terms of his passing completion percentage, with a clean pocket, 74.1% compared to a 56.45 when he was pressured last season. That's one of the better pressured completion percentages amongst all quarterbacks. Other statistics that he led amongst all quarterbacks, passer rating last season with a 122.8 overall passer rating. He was above Drew Brees. And also, on top of it, he had a 98.4%, or not 98.4%, 98.4 passer rating, only behind Drew Brees when pressured last season. So even when he was pressured, even when he was throwing incompletions, he wasn't making mistakes. He wasn't turning over the ball, which is a huge difference maker in terms of fantasy. Negative points, definitely not going to be something that we're looking for. In terms of play action, he had a 76.74% passing completion percentage when using play action plays. The highest amongst all quarterbacks. Obviously, the offensive line and Derrick Henry make a difference. But when we look at the comparison of what the Tennessee Titans were prior to Ryan Tannehill taking over the job, they averaged 16.33 points per game as a team. They turned that around and they nearly doubled it, averaging 30.4 points per game as an offense in that 10-week span from weeks 7 through 17. That in itself is beautiful. And I think the fact that Derrick Henry is such a monster in this offense, Ryan Tannehill doesn't have to really worry about everything being on his shoulders. I mean, we saw it in the playoffs. Sure, Ryan Tannehill did not perform well against those incredible defenses, but all in all, the pressure is off of Ryan Tannehill to make so many plays. Back in Miami, it was really just stop Ryan Tannehill, stop Jarvis Landry, stop the passing attack. Now, it's really defensive coordinators staring up all night, worrying about stop Derrick Henry, stop this offensive line, and that's pretty much given Tannehill a little bit of cushion, and hopefully that cushion is going to lead him into 2020 and have an incredible season, which I'm expecting to do so. Moving on, let's talk about our next quarterback on today's list, Daniel Jones, the sophomore wonder who potentially could be one of these sophomore quarterbacks that has a breakout season here. I mean, when we look at the past couple seasons in terms of sophomore quarterbacks, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff the following season were incredible comparatively to what their rookie years, had in store. Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson sophomore seasons, by far much better. When we look at Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson sophomore seasons, incredible. Now, potentially Daniel Jones has the opportunity for the New York Giants to run away with with a chance of being one of these upside quarterbacks, maybe break into the top 12, but we'll just have to wait and see. Either way, last season, he was only given the starting job from week 3 and on. I mean, he wasn't even the starter there, but he came in early in the first quarter. But regardless, last season produced 3,027 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Again, he was a rookie last season. Turnovers are something that's of a problem for him, but we'll talk about that. 279 total rushing yards, great number there, and 226.98 total fantasy points from weeks 3 through 17. After he was given the reins of the offense in the Tampa Bay game in week 3, he averaged 18.98 fantasy points per game. Sure, considerably less than the preceding quarterbacks that we talked about that are on the screen right now. But as a rookie quarterback with learning curve and the fact that the offense around him was falling apart due to injury, I'm pretty proud about what Daniel Jones was able to fight through and produce. Last season, he also had 4 games of 4+ touchdowns. Outside of that, he always scored 1 touchdown in every game that he played. And this all being said, he only started in 12 total games, and he only played in 13 games total? Something like 13 games total. He did not play in week 2, and he did not play in weeks 14 and 15 because he was injured. And Mr. Eli Manning had to come in against the Philadelphia Eagles and against the Miami Dolphins and take over. Now, I mention that because it is a pretty relevant statistic, because Daniel Jones in that time, from weeks 3 through 17, sure, he averaged 18.98 points, but he was the number 15 overall quarterback in a 4-point per passing touchdown league in that time span. But he did miss 2 games in that time span. And if, let's say, for example, we add 10 points to each of those games, which is a horrible performance, he would have finished about the number 6 or 7 overall quarterback. I mean, in those 2 weeks that he was absent, Eli Manning came in and produced about 16 points a week. If we gave him those 16 points a week, yeah, he would have been, a top 5 almost quarterback in that amount of time. So Daniel Jones has definitely proven that despite everything, he's still, he's learning, he's getting better on a weekly basis. In terms of adjusted completion percentage, he had a 72.3% last season. In the red zone, we saw a lot of maturity. Sure, he wasn't able to be as accurate as he would have wanted to in terms of completion percentage, but he was 12 touchdowns to 0 interceptions there. Again, turnovers are an issue for this guy. He fumbled the ball about 18 times last season. I think it was 5th most amongst all players in National Football League history in a single season. He obviously threw 12 interceptions. These are statistics that scare me, right? But, he didn't lose all the fumbles. Sure, they recovered a couple here and there. But I think going into 2020, now that you've gotten the growing pains out of the way and you've got some experience under your belt, and the fact that this offense is going to be healthy once and, finally for all, the fact, Barkley played only 13 games, Sterling Shepard was out for a considerable amount of time, Evan Ingram was, pretty much gone after that midway point, Golden Tate missed the first 4 games of the season, Darius Slayton was gone, even the backups were getting injured last season, and that just, that wasn't Daniel Jones's fault, but he was still able to continue to produce, continue to improve, and be a decent quarterback down in the stretch. Overall, when I talk about Daniel Jones, a lot of it's going to have to do with whether those offensive pieces around him are going to help him out as much as he helps them. It's a mutual process. You can only be as good as you could possibly be if your offensive line's not giving you much time, and that could be an issue this year. This offseason, their left tackle, Nate Solder, he opted out because of the entire state of COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. But they did draft an offensive lineman in the first round, and they drafted an offensive lineman in the third round. He's going to have 2 rookie offensive tackles. That in itself is a very scary situation. When we looked at what he was able to do in terms of pressured pockets versus clean pockets last season, in clean pockets still only had a 68.9% passing completion percentage. Just, those are rookie stats. Kyler Murray was even worse in a clean pocket. In a pressured pocket, 50% passing completion percentage. Not terrible there in terms of QBR, 96.8 to a 72.2. All in all, not terrible. But the thing about Daniel Jones, in my opinion, is just going to be where can he grow and how much is the offense that surrounds him going to help him out. I really do think there is going to be a huge difference maker this year in the idea that the offense, the new offensive coordinator with Jason Garrett coming in, everything's going to be shifted around, and they're going to lean more in on the fact that he's got some strengths here that they have to go ahead and allow him to exploit as much as possible, because again, he still is a younger quarterback and is still learning every possible time he goes out and starts a game. But regardless, I think Daniel Jones could be a huge upside guy in 2020. Moving on to our final quarterback, Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker Mayfield is again one of the more polarizing figures in terms of fantasy football or football in general. Last season, had a very disappointing year after being consensusly ranked amongst the top 5-6 quarterbacks in fantasy. After what he was able to produce in his rookie season, again, he took over the job from Tyrod Taylor and was able to have a very good season. 27 passing touchdowns, 3,700 passing yards, 240.1 fantasy points in terms of a 4-point per passing touchdown format. 254.1 fantasy points in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. All in all, Baker Mayfield was a fantastic rookie, the number 1 overall pick. And we thought, oh my God, he got Odell Beckham Jr. in the offseason. They're only going to improve. This is going to be a fantastic offense with Nick Chubb, also being able to feast in his rookie season. But unfortunately, we didn't find that. 3,800 passing yards, 22 passing touchdowns, 21 interceptions. Sure, you had 141 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Those are good numbers, but 250.18 fantasy points on a 16-week basis just doesn't get the job done. And coming into the 2019 season, the first 5 games of the season for Baker Mayfield were atrocious. I mean, he was one of the worst quarterbacks, and many of you felt it who had him and drafted him as early as you did. That's why, drafting a quarterback early could hurt you so much, especially if they bust rather than if a late guy, ends up just being a flub. That's why we're talking about sleepers, because if you draft Baker Mayfield late in your draft, you're not putting too much draft capital in him because, again, he's not being valued very high. But when you go up and you try to draft a guy early and he doesn't pan out, it hurts you even more. But I wanted to mention, weeks 1 through 5, he was horrible. In fact, in week 5, he had 0 fantasy points against the 49ers on primetime Monday Night Football. But then they went to a bye week. He came back. Was it a bye week? I don't know if it was a bye week, but they came back and he kind of reprogrammed. From weeks 6 through 17, he had averaged 17.66 fantasy points per game. And he improved. In 7 of the last 11 games, he scored 2+ touchdowns. Great. But the biggest difference going into 2020 comparatively to 2019 is going to be the coaching change. I think, sure, Baker Mayfield could have been a better quarterback. He could have utilized Odell Beckham far more. He could have been a more accurate quarterback. Even with an adjusted completion percentage, he only had a 69.5 completion percentage, which was as bad as Daniel Jones. That says a lot comparatively from a rookie to a sophomore quarterback. Sure, in terms of accuracy down in the red zone, he was terrible. Only had a 40% passing completion percentage. Sure, he threw 15 touchdowns down there, but that doesn't make a difference when there's so much room to grow. Now, the thing that this offseason, like I mentioned, is going to be the biggest difference is the offensive coordinator and head coach change. Freddie Kitchens buried this team. He killed any hope that this city had for, the Browns going to the Super Bowl in year 2, blah, blah. That was just, it was quickly shut down. Their torch was snuffed and their chances were gone. And we all knew the writings were on the wall that they were going to, find a new, coordinator or coach. They went and did that. They went and got offensive coordinator of the Vikings. They went and got Kevin Stefanski. Now, the exciting part about this offense going into 2020 is the fact that they are going to rebuild the Viking offense in Cleveland. And if you remember what the Vikings offense did, they ran the ball down your throat. They played good defense, obviously, but that's not the offense. And they played with a lot of play action, and they allowed Kirk Cousins to throw the ball 160 times less than he's ever done in his career, and only throw 4 touchdowns less, and also throw 4 less interceptions, which was, give and take a pretty good overall balance. But how do you do that? You got to address the offensive line position. That's what they did this offseason. They brought in Jack Conklin, like I mentioned, with Ryan Tannehill. They lost one of the better right tackles. Well, the Cleveland Browns inherited that. They went and also got Andy Janovich, fullback from the Broncos. Why? Because in Minnesota, they use C.J. Ham, the fullback, almost, 30% of the time in their offensive formation. You bring in another great fullback, perfect. You bring in another good tight end. Why? Because the Vikings of last season ran double tight end sets more than 50% of the time and more than anybody in the National Football League last season. Austin Hooper joining David Njoku, perfect. You go ahead and you bring in 2 big body targets for Baker Mayfield down in the red zone. On top of it, you drafted a first-round offensive lineman, Jedrick Wills, who only allowed 1 sack in 900+ snaps last season at Alabama. You've got an incredible offense that has a lot of potential. Again, besides Hooper and Njoku, you have 2 all-pro wide receivers, Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. You have the guy that, in my opinion, should have won the rushing title if it wasn't for Derrick Henry's late season heroics, Nick Chubb in the backfield, and you have Kareem Hunt. Again, the Vikings used the most 2-back sets last season. Having these 2 guys, it's going to be the Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison of this offense. Overall, with an offensive line improvement, with an improvement in terms of scheme and protections and everything going forward, I expect the efficiency of Baker Mayfield to pretty much be exact with the level of how incredible Kirk Cousins was at times last season. Kirk Cousins had 26 passing touchdowns and only 4 interceptions thrown. Kirk Cousins has always been a guy that wants to turn over the ball. He's willing to give it to the other team because that's just how he plays at times. But the fact that we can potentially see that this year, that's an exciting thing. I mean, last season, sure, Kirk Cousins threw less touchdowns, but he, posted career highs in air yards, interception percentage, touchdown percentage. Everything was at a pretty good pace there. Sure, his yards per completion in the respective offense, considering they didn't want to, they really didn't throw the ball that often. They only had Adam Thielen for a couple games, and then Stephon Diggs pretty much was everything after that. With this offense, far better talent in terms of tight end and receiver position. The sky's the limit for Baker Mayfield, in my opinion. I think Kevin Stefanski is going to come in here. He's going to impose his will in terms of running the ball. It's going to set up play action. It's going to set up Baker Mayfield for success. And I think Baker Mayfield, just in itself, proved last season that he prefers to sit in a play action sense. Last season, only 2 quarterbacks threw more touchdowns in play action plays than a guy like Baker Mayfield. It was Kirk Cousins and it was Lamar Jackson. Those are the only 2 other teams, obviously, because they ran the ball the most amongst everybody in the NFL. Cleveland Browns not too far behind. Also, Baker Mayfield's passing completion percentage last season on play action plays was 10% higher than his regular plays. We got to lean into that. We got to allow Baker to stop turning over the ball, find his best targets, and find his best play. And that's what I expect to see in 2020. And that's why he's one of these sleeper quarterbacks. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's content talking about sleeper quarterbacks. Again, this isn't the only sleeper quarterbacks that are out there. There are guys like Drew Lock, Cam Newton, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, in my opinion, Gardner Minshew being extremely undervalued going into the 2020 fantasy football season. If you play in a super flex, fantastic. If you play in a 1 quarterback league, a lot of these guys aren't going to matter. But if you're looking for a late quarterback, tandem that you want to stick together and pretty much start and play matchups on a weekly basis, these are the guys that are definitely, potential prospects you can go after super late in your drafts because a lot of people are ignoring their potential. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.